Good morning, Stink. You already know what today is. Today is January 14th, so that means that we are on Mark chapter 14, baby. Open up your Bibles. And if you hadn't had the opportunity to read Mark chapter 14, baby, pause this video, read your word, come back, let's discuss it because the tea is piping hot. I always tell you, be sure that you are reading the word for yourself. You can sit on this internet and hear anybody and they cousin in them read the Bible, but when you actually sit down and digest the words of God for yourself, this is where the true relationship comes from. This is how you get to know your Father. This is how you get the information that you need to navigate this life that's not always easy. But let's get into Mark chapter 14. I'm going to tell you what stood out to me. And honestly, it was almost every single section. So chapter 14 starts off where we have Simon, a man who previously had leprosy. And Jesus is in Simon's house. And while he's in his house, there's a woman who comes up to Jesus with a jar, baby, but not just any jar. This jar is filled with oil. Now, oil back in the day was expensive, okay? They used oil for a lot of different reasons, but one of the reasons that they used oil was to kind of bless the bodies that passed away. It was a sweet fragrance, a very sweet fragrance, but it was like a blessing on people's bodies. So when this woman, Mary of Bethany is who she really is, but it wasn't listed in Mark. We've seen that in the book of Matthew. When she came over and blessed when she came over and blessed him, because that oil was so expensive, it was literally the cost of a full year's wages. When the disciples seen this, they was like, girl, are you serious? Like, why would you waste that expensive oil that's a full year's of wages to put it on Jesus? Please make it make sense. And Jesus had to explain to him, baby, this right here, she's honoring me. Let me break it down to you. Jesus said in Mark chapter 14, verse 6, leave her alone while criticize her for doing such a good thing to me. And honestly, we can take note of that right there, because a lot of times God is going to call you to do things. He's going to require you to do some things. He's going to make sure that you do some things for his honor. And even though on the outside looking in, people may not understand what you're doing. They may not get it. They may look at you like, why are you spending a full year's wages on doing that? Why are you talking to that girl? Why are you doing this and doing that? But if God called you to do it, you are doing it for his good. And that is the key. Everybody's not meant to understand what God calls you to do. If he called you to do it, do it. So then when we skip over to verse number 10, Judas agrees to betray, he agrees to betray Jesus, okay? Now, mind you, Judas was picked to be a disciple by Jesus. Let's not forget that. Jesus picked Judas. Judas was actually in charge of the money for the disciples. So Judas had a big role amongst the disciples. But Judas agreed to betray Jesus in verse number 10. But you know what stood out to me reading it this time is verse number 11, where it says that when he went to the priest, so he went to the priest and agreed to betray Jesus. And it says in verse number 11, they were delighted when they heard why he had come. Listen, let me tell you why that stood out to me. Because people that do dirty work, people that ain't about the right, they gonna be real excited to see you come when you ready to do some bad stuff too. Those high priests was ready to kill off Jesus. And Judas, honey, was ready to participate. And guess who was way more excited to see Judas than anybody else? The high priest, because they knew exactly what that meant for them. Then let's fast forward to verse number 17, where it's the Last Supper, right? Jesus is sitting with all of them at the table and they're smashing, right? They got all the good foods, right? And Jesus says, I tell you the truth, one of you will betray me. Then everybody around the table wants to say it ain't gonna be them. It ain't gonna be me, Jesus. It ain't gonna be me, Jesus. Girl, sit down. Jesus has to set him straight. And he said, listen, it will be far better for the man who betrays me to never have been born. Baby, I know they was like, oh, well, we in trouble. So this is when the communion goes, right? This is what we experience. Most churches do every first Sunday. Your church might do it at a different time, but this is where communion comes in handy or comes into play in Mark chapter 4, verse 22 through 23. So if you don't know the true story behind the communion, if you don't understand why you guys take that little baby cracker and that juice, my daughter calls it a church snack, then you want to go and read Mark chapter 14, verse 22 through 25, so that you can see exactly how that plays out. Now, Jesus says to them in verse 25, I tell you the truth, I will not drink wine again until the day I drink it new in the kingdom of heaven. Jesus wasn't about to get no more Stella Rosa until he ended up in the kingdom of heaven. You see what I'm saying? No more Pinot Grigio. It got real, baby. And the crazy part is they're sitting at this table and Jesus tell them that one of y'all going to betray me. They looking around. Judas had already met with the old boys. They looking around like, it ain't gonna be me, Jesus. It ain't gonna be me, Jesus. And then they walked away from the dinner singing. You know what I'm saying? And here come Peter, because Peter always got something to say. When I tell you Peter be talking, baby, Peter is a talker. So when you go into verse number 29, Peter said, even if everyone else deserts you, Jesus, I ain't going nowhere. No. Baby, Peter, have a seat. Because in a few more verses, you're going to be the one. Jesus had to tell him in verse 30, he was like, I'm going to tell you the truth, Peter. This very night, tonight, before the rooster crows, you're going to betray me 3 times. Cuz you 3 times. Now, mind you, again, Peter was also picked to be a disciple by Jesus. And Peter's like, nah, because even if I have to die with you, cuz, you know what I'm saying? Peter was like, even if I got to die with you, baby, talk is cheap. And that's what that tells me. Peter was a talker. Talk is cheap. What are your actions saying, Stinkabutt? What are they saying, Peter? Now, let's go over to the garden where Jesus is in deep agony. Jesus is like, oh my gosh, this is really about to happen. He goes to this garden, he goes to this garden, but this right here lets you know how to be a good friend and how not to be a good friend, okay? When your friend is going through it. This right here, listen. So Jesus goes to the garden to pray. All right. The disciples are sitting off to the side. Jesus goes to the garden to pray. Jesus goes back to the disciples and these men are sleeping like they can't keep their eyes open. Jesus is like, wake up, bro. You know what I'm about to go through? Jesus leaves and goes prays again, comes back. They can barely keep their eyes open. Jesus goes to pray again, comes back. And these people are asleep again. And Jesus is like, you know what? Just stay asleep, because at this point I done had enough. Now, what does this tell us about us being friends? Baby, when your friend is going through something, I want a friend who's going to be down right there praying with me. You know what I'm saying? Or if I need my own personal space and I need prayer on my own, I need you in your corner praying too. Ain't nothing like having a friend where you are deep in prayer and they are praying with you. There's nothing like it. So then fast forward, we're looking at verse 43 and so forth. Judas betrays Jesus. We know the story. He tells the people, like, listen, the man that I kissed, that's the one you need to be arresting. So he went up to Jesus, kissed him, and Jesus got arrested. Right? So then we have Peter, the one who always talking, baby, done cut this man's ear off. The man that was trying to get Jesus, Peter done cut his ear off. Now, according to the book of Luke, when Peter cut the man's ear off, the book of Luke tells the testimony that Jesus actually healed that man's ear. Now, fast forward, everybody was just sitting at the table eating chicken earlier, right? They was all over there eating Popeyes. And as we fast forward, we're looking at verse 30. It says, then all the disciples, all of them, deserted him and ran away. All them disciples left. And you think your walk with God ain't personal. So fast forward, Jesus gets arrested. He gets asked the question, are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? Jesus says, I am. Period, Jesus. And he says, and you gonna see me seated in the place of power next to God's right hand. Okay, so this made them hot, because now they're like, oh, he committing blasphemy, because they didn't believe who Jesus really was. Then if you look at verse number 65, this is what Jesus had to go through for our sins. Ours. He gets spit on. He gets blindfolded. He gets beaten by their fist. People are yelling at him, telling him to prophesy to them. They're criticizing him. He's being chastised. Guards even slapped him around. Peter outside the gate, I'm sure he's hearing this. It has to be a lot of commotion. Peter sitting outside the gate and gets approached 3 times. People are asking him, are you a friend of Jesus? Oh yeah, he was with Jesus. Are you da-da-da-da? Peter denies him 3 times. And when he denies him the 3rd time, the voice of Jesus rings in his head and reminds him exactly what Jesus said. Baby, if you have not gotten into your word today, Mark chapter 14, baby, get on your Zoom. Okay, get into your word. Like I always tell you, be sure you pray before you read it. Read it. What is God telling you? What is he wanting you to get from Mark chapter 14? Let me know, and I will see you tomorrow, Stinkbutt. Bye, boo.